You ready, Craig? Go live now. Alison, sorry. Okay, Alison, that's us. We're ready to go.
Okay. Hello, and as some of us are still working remotely, a very good afternoon from various parts of Scotland. On behalf of Glasgow Science Centre and the YWCA Scotland, the Young Women's Movement, I would like to extend a really warm welcome to everyone who's joining us today for this Building a Better Future panel discussion. My name is Alison McLaughlin, and I'm part of the Community Learning and Development team at Glasgow Science Centre. Our role focuses on supporting communities to build awareness, confidence and knowledge to engage with issues that matter locally and globally. We aim to empower people to make positive changes in their lives and communities through learning and engagement with science topics like weather and climate change and the impacts of these on everyday life. Developing relationships and getting to know our communities and working in collaboration with partners enables us to bring science learning to a wide and diverse population. One of our regular partners and co-host of today's event is YWCA Scotland, with whom we develop and deliver STEM, environment and human geography related workshops with and for women. This event came about from a conversation exploring ways we could continue our work together online in response to COVID-19 restrictions. So during today's event, we will explore the impacts and challenges of climate change in relation to gender from an intersectional feminist perspective. Before I pass over to today's chair, Patricia Kupiec, who is the CEO at YWCA Scotland, I'd like to share some words from Mary Robinson. We have a shared endeavour to protect the earth, which requires an unprecedented collective effort, which cannot leave anyone behind. Gender equality is a prerequisite. We need to build on the strengths, capabilities, wisdom and perspectives of women and girls, not only to build their climate resilience and ability to adapt, but crucially so that they can be active agents of mitigation and positive change. So I'd like to thank you again for joining us today, especially in light of Zoom and virtual meeting overload. So without further delay, it is a pleasure to introduce Patricia, who will expand on the work of the YWCA Scotland and intersectional feminism, introduce the fantastic panel members who have kindly agreed to be part of this event today, and chair the main discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison, and a very warm welcome from all of us at YWCA Scotland, the Young Women's Movement. If you are not familiar with our work, we are Scotland's national feminist organisation and part of the biggest worldwide movement of young women leading change. We work with girls and women experiencing multiple disadvantage, but our work is not designed as crisis intervention. Our focus is on personal growth and development of life skills that tackle underrepresentation of women in positions of power. You can find out more about our work on our social media channels. We are always at Young Women Scot. And as an organization, we apply intersectional approach to all work we do, and hence the idea for this women-led panel. So if you are new to this term, here is a brief context and history of it. So with roots in Black feminist activism, and especially the work of Kimberly Crenshaw and Patricia Hill Collins, an intersectional approach emphasizes that particular experience of discrimination are results of multiple structural oppressions. These create unique constellations that include not only just gender, but also race, sexuality, ability, age, social class, religion, caring responsibilities, or position as a citizen, migrant, refugee, or asylum seeker. And these intersections produce unique experiences of inequality. An intersectional approach is more than simply looking at the sum of different discriminations, but it reflects an understanding that identities and experiences are dynamic and changing. So this requires us to trace problems back to their roots, find the structural and systemic oppressions that shape lived experiences, and recognize the full picture, not just a snapshot. So for example, I experience oppression because I'm a woman and a migrant and I'm from a working class background. But I also don't experience many other forms of oppression because I'm privileged in other areas of my life. So I'm white, I'm cisgender, heterosexual, able-bodied, well-educated, which means that my life and experiences are much easier than those of many others. So you might be wondering, why is it important to consider intersectionality when we talk about climate change issues? So it is important because personal identities and access to privilege that these grant influence our experiences of climate change issues. And we know that climate change and its effects disproportionately affect women, people of color, working class, LGBTQI community, and people with disabilities. And of course, one person can belong to all of these groups, making their experience of oppression related to climate change issues even more pronounced. These marginalized communities are the first to suffer and die in increasingly common climate-related catastrophes. The disruption caused by these extreme events places women and girls at heightened risk from unequal access to healthcare and resources, to a higher risk of sexual violence, sexual exploitation and abuse, trafficking, and domestic violence. 80% of climate refugees are women. And the impact goes beyond climate catastrophes, and it affects our day-to-day life. So for example, the 2019 report from MRC Centre for Environment and Health found that in England, the most deprived 20% of neighborhoods had higher air pollution levels than the least deprived neighborhoods, and the worst air pollution levels were seen in ethnically diverse neighborhoods. So these statistics, even though it's a very tiny snapshot of the full picture, already provide evidence for why considering intersectionality is so critical. We have to move away from looking at climate change only through a privileged lens if we want to provide solutions to address it. As Audre Lorde once said, there is no such thing as single issue struggle because we do not live single issue lives. And we hope that this panel will give you food for thought on how multiple structures of oppression intertwine with climate emergency we are facing. So I'm now delighted to introduce you to our amazing panelists. And before I do that, I just wanted to provide a short disclaimer that the views they are sharing here today are their own and not necessarily their employer or associated organizations. So first up, we have Jane Morrison. Jane is a biologist who grew up in the Highlands of Scotland, where she fell in love with nature. She currently works in environmental protection and is a trustee at Wellbeing Alliance Scotland. In previous roles in the environment sector, she worked in conservation, climate change, ecological research, youth empowerment, and creating behavior change. She was one of the co-founders of 2050 Climate Group and is on the advisory panel of the Young Women's Movement. She also took part in our first Young Women Lead program, forming the first parliamentary committee made up of women under the age of 30. She has contributed to designing environmental justice policy with the UN Human Rights Youth Council in Geneva. In 2018, she was also recognized as one of 30 under 30 inspiring women in Scotland, and she won the Suffragette Spirit Award from Amnesty International. She is passionate about protecting nature and helping create a more equal society. We also have with us Zarina Ahmad. Zarina's work combines two important areas of interest: equalities and climate change. She has been working in the environmental sector for over 10 years on climate change and within the equalities sector for 8 years. The aim has been to change the landscape of the environmental sector to ensure there is more engagement and a voice from the ethnic minority sector. This has been achieved through working in partnership to deliver climate change challenge funded projects and building relationships with NGOs addressing equalities, diversity, and inclusion. The voice of the BME sector now has a platform through the creation of the Ethnic Minority Environmental Network, a network for future leadership. In addition, Zarina is a climate reality leader and delivers training specializing on climate change, climate justice, ecofeminism, and equalities, diversity, and inclusion. And we also have with us Ellie Murtagh, who is a climate resilience coordinator at Sniffer, a Scottish sustainability charity. She works on the Adaptation Scotland programme, a Scottish government-funded initiative which provides advice and support to help organisations, businesses and communities prepare for and build resilience to the impacts of climate change. She is also at the same time completing a PhD on decision-making for climate resilience at the University of Strathclyde. She was also on our 30 under 30 list of inspiring young women in 2019. We also have with us Lola Okunrinboye, who is a chartered environmentalist and a sustainability professional. She leads the Women in Sustainability Network Hub in Aberdeen and has worked in various industries as an environmental and sustainability professional. She is a self-motivated leader, inspirational speaker, and facilitator. Lola's passion for engagement has encouraged her to leverage technology as a tool for connecting and building a strong network of women who develop each other. And last but not least, we have Dr. Emma Woodham. So Emma completed a PhD in cancer invasion, migration and metastasis at Cancer Research UK Beatson Institute in Glasgow in 2016. So while working on her research, she discovered a passion for engaging people with her work. She made the move into full-time public engagement work at Glasgow Science Centre as a science learning coordinator and gained experience in creating and delivering engaging and relevant STEM engagement experiences. She has now taken up the role of Climate Change Programme Manager to coincide with the arrival of COP26 in Glasgow, when Glasgow Science Centre will host the official public engagement zone of the conference. She is working with key stakeholders to build a climate change engagement program that engages people of all ages and backgrounds in the lead up and during COP26, as well as working to secure a public engagement legacy from the conference. So as you can see, we have an amazing lineup of speakers, and we have asked you, the audience, to submit questions for them. And we selected 11 of these questions to guide our discussion today. And we'll hopefully also have some time at the end for you to ask follow-up questions. So you can comment on YouTube, and Stephen from Glasgow Science Centre and Elena from the Young Women's Movement will feedback these questions and comments to us, so we can ask them at the end of the panel. So the first question that we have is an open question, just to kick us off, so any of the panelists can take it. And it's a question from Jill at Open University Scotland, who asks, Mary Robinson says we should envisage the future we want and rush towards it. What future would you like to rush towards? So anyone up? For this question, I know it's a big one, but I think it's a nice sort of warm-up question. So what's the future that you want to see?
I can start.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I'll start by saying I'd like to see a future, a just future, a future whereby everyone is able to contribute equally, and a future that encourages diversity and inclusion in all fields, and especially the environmental field as well.
Yeah, if I can also add to that, the future I'm rushing towards and indeed fighting for is one where climate adaptation is not seen as a poor relative or an alternative to our effort to fight climate change, but indeed a complement to it, because global action to slow climate change through greenhouse gas emissions reductions, whilst promising, is insufficient, and conditions such as higher temperature, rising seas, fiercer storms, more acidic oceans are inevitable. And whilst these changes have the ability to result in widespread environmental, economic, and human tolls, they don't have to if we invest appropriately in climate adaptation. And adaptation, if done right, can lead to better and more prosperous futures. So I'm really rushing towards a future where adaptation is undertaken in a way which addresses inequities, ensures a thriving natural environment, and enhances the well-being of all. Thanks.
And for me, I would say the future that I'm rushing towards is one where people can thrive on a healthy, socially just planet, one where the economy that we have serves the well-being of people and nature and not the other way around.
And then for me, I would like to see a future where we have no boundaries, no wars, no poverty, no abuse, no lots of things. It might be a bit negative, but yes, I would like to see this I'm probably maybe idealistic here, but I would just like to see everyone living in harmony, and that's not just with each other but also with the planet and within the planetary boundaries.
Brilliant.
I can kind of finish off there and just agree with everything that everyone else has said, and to add there, just to see a lot more global connections, especially between global north and south, and feel the impact that we have in the developed world, and understand the experience and the stories of those indigenous populations across the world, and feel those connections, and to echo what Jane said, that balance between the people and planet and prosperity and rush towards that. And if COVID accelerates that, then that's all the better, but that's something that we absolutely need to be thinking about.
Yeah. So it sounds like, yeah, future focused on adaptation, no boundaries, well-being, and a harmony and equality and diversity is something that we all want to see, and what a great future that would be. And you're so right, Emma, that if, you know, this current crisis kind of exposes some of these cracks that exist in our systematic oppression of other people and the environment that we live in, that's, you know, that's like one benefit of maybe going through a really challenging situation that we are currently in. So hopefully we can emerge from it with a more kind of prosperous and better future for all. So the second question that we have is also a kind of open-end question. So all of you can take it, or one of you can decide to take it. So the question is from Pamela at the Surefoot Effect, and she is asking, how can we not only raise women's voices, but encourage a feminist approach to change from everyone, which will in turn help women's voices to be heard? So do I have a volunteer for the feminist approach to raise women's voices and help to make sure that voices of women are heard in the climate change?
I can start by saying that from COVID-19, we've all seen that it's the countries that are led by female have been the one to be more resilient with dealing with COVID-19 crisis. And I think everyone, all experts, the scientists have seen the correlation between COVID-19 and climate change. So I can start by saying that it's obvious that women need to take the lead on this. So I'll let Zarina continue.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say that is ensuring that the women have a platform for their voices is really important. So we need to have allies, and that allies we're not just looking at men to be our allies, but each other to be our allies. And I think it's like some of the work that Lola does, is that I read about being there for each other, having a network for women is really important. And as someone said to me once, a mentor of mine said that our networks are worth a weight in gold. So making sure that gold is valued and those networks are valued are really important. But the other issue that I think that's highlighted to me looking at ecofeminism is even the terminology of feminism. I think a lot of women still shy away from the term of feminism, and it would be really interesting to even to hear from the audience what their views are around feminism and why that still is the case.
Yeah, absolutely. You can put comments on YouTube while you're watching live stream. So yeah, let us know, and we can expand our discussion on that based on your comments and suggestions and questions. Is there anything that Ellie, Jane, or Emma you want to add to this question?
Yeah, it was just to build on what Zarina said there about platforming women. And I think another thing that we all individually have the power to do right now is to talk about women's successes and tell those stories and let them tell those stories. Stories are such a powerful tool in creating change. They're one of the oldest tools that we have. So I think the more that we can platform women to tell those stories and then continue to spread that on, the more chance we have of creating change.
Absolutely. And I think it's quite telling that two of the panelists today were on our 30 under 30 list. And a goal of that list is to platform those diverse voices of young women, to show young women as experts in their fields. And we have two of these experts joining us today. So yeah, great answers. So moving on maybe to one of the kind of a question that's specific to one of the panelists. But again, if people want to pitch in, please let me know and I can bring you in. So the question is for Emma. And it's from Marianne at Christian Aid, who is asking, how can we make sure the implementation of the UNFCCC's GAP is intersectional? And Emma, if you can maybe start by explaining what UNFCCC GAP is for those of us who might not know.
I will certainly do my best, but I would welcome any support in that. So thanks, Marianne, for your question. So of course, so the UNFCCC, as I tend to shorten it as, the Convention on Climate Change directed by the United Nations. Obviously, we're delighted in Glasgow that the 26th Conference of the Parties, otherwise known as COP26, will be arriving in Glasgow next year. So my understanding is back in COP25 in Madrid last year. So I was lucky enough to attend the Green Zone at COP25. That's when the GAP report, the Gender Action Plan that is, was signed off, which was a huge amount of progress. And it took a lot of energy, particularly from the civil society movement, as I understand. But nonetheless, it was a huge success. But it does highlight the fact that coming to create these kind of reports, and in fact the COP process in general is really challenging. Lots of people have to come together and share views, and there are obviously huge lengthy discussions over full stops and commas and etc. So I think maybe sort of taking it to talking maybe a bit about the key themes within the GAP report, which I think a lot of people on this call will certainly relate to in terms of capacity building, in terms of gender balance and participation, which are key themes of the GAP report. And you know, these are elements that we all are striving towards building, particularly capacity building. And I think in terms of the question and how implementation of the GAP can ensure that the intersectionality is shining through there, I think there's lots of different ways that we need to be looking, particularly within the blue zone of the COP when it visits Glasgow next year, when we're checking in on the development of the GAP, in terms of making sure we're building capacity in the UNFCCC body members and the Secretariat staff to make sure that each of their responses are intersectional, responses to climate action are intersectional. And in terms of, you know, a lot of information on the projects that are being developed and completed as part of the UNFCCC to be, you know, a lot more visible and transparent on their website, and always being reflective and taking a research-based approach. But taking it maybe more sort of closely in towards our work at the Science Centre, where I'm kind of more experienced in terms of public engagement, it's you know, it's making sure that we welcome everybody to this COP, and that we can empower the public to challenge you know, implementation of these structures and be more knowledgeable, and make sure that everybody can bring about change. And to do that, we ourselves need to welcome in everybody into that programme, make sure that there's a lot of open and honest platforms for people to come in and engage with, make sure that we can you know, share lots of different types of voices and exchange that knowledge. And I'll come maybe later on into more detail in terms of how I think we do that in the Green Zone, and why that's going to be very important.
That's so exciting. Is there anything that anyone wants to add to that before we move on? Yeah, it was a very comprehensive answer. So yeah, I can see people nodding no. So I'll move on to the next question, which is for Zarina. But likewise, if anyone wants to come in, you're free to do that. So we have a question from Sorsha, who is asking, is there a women's environmental network in Scotland? Do you have recommendations for groups, campaigns, movements that are specifically using intersectional feminist approaches to environmental protection, either in the UK, so I can get involved, or overseas, so I can learn more about their model?
So I'm going to look at the global first and then bring it back to local. So globally, we've got the Women's Environment and Development Organisation. So that's probably the largest feminist environmental organisation, and it's known as We Do. So Emma talked about the Gender Action Plan by UNFCCC, and We Do were instrumental in developing that. So this is how powerful they are, or how influential they are. And it's a huge organisation with women feminist environmental organisations, individuals that have actually created a lot of change around the world. So have a look at them, have a look at their website, and there's lots of ways to get involved with them. And then also on their website, you'll find that they've listed groups that they work with, some environmentalist groups that they work with, whether they're young feminist groups or whether they are working locally in Scotland, not in Scotland, but in the UK. So you've got groups like Arab Youth Climate Movement, Diva for Equality, Feminist Task Force, which is based in New York, and the Caribbean Association for Feminist Research and Action, which is based in Grenada, and the Gender CC, and Women's Environmental Programme, which is Nigerian. So there's many groups there that you can have a look at, and it is a really good source to have a look at if you're looking to do things more globally. Right, and then locally, right, bringing it back to the UK, right, so we have the Women's Environmental Network, which is based in London, and they do work right across the UK, and hopefully I'm hoping to do some collaboration work and bring them up to Scotland, to work up here in Scotland around COP26 to get more women involved. And there's also the Women's Budget Group, which is looking at policy and money, and together with WEN, they actually looked at creating the Feminist Green New Deal network. So there's also Manchester University are involved with that. So Dr. Sherilyn McGregor and Maeve Cohn are involved in this group. So have a look at the work that they've been doing and see how you can get involved. And they've created a paper as well, the Feminist New Green Deal paper. And they look at like climate justice movement and looking at intersectionality and feminist issues and who else is there? So there's also Climate Reframe. So Climate Reframe is a list of BME people across the UK that are looking at working on climate justice. So it's not just from a feminist perspective, but a lot of them will be looking at intersectionality. So that's people like me who would probably fit into that group, right? And then there's a number of feminist groups around, but not very many of these feminist groups actually look at environmental or climate justice. So it's really good that we've got Young Women's Movement here with us today, which is great that they are actually connecting the dots. And that's nice to see that. Now in Glasgow, right, in Scotland, we actually don't have a women's environmental network or anybody that's actually looking at this subject of like ecofeminism or feminism within climate justice. So it's a great opportunity if you want to get involved to start setting something up yourselves, and maybe we can all come together and do something here. So yeah, but there's lots of individuals in Scotland that are working on different issues. Like I know Annie Morgan, who works on Mugati Community Garden, and she's been involved in a lot of feminist movements throughout the years. Penny Cole, who works with Canon Democracy and Scene Collective, she does a lot around feminism. And then there's Friends of the Earth, who look at intersectionality, and Tripod, who do a lot of training around intersectionality. So yes, I think there's a lot of opportunity here in Scotland to get involved in a lot of things if you want to.
Amazing. I was wondering if I can take that opportunity to ask Lola to tell us more about your Women and Sustainability Network. Yeah,
that's a good way to bring it in. I think what we do in Women in Sustainability is basically providing a network. It's a global network for female change makers looking to build their network, grow, and also build a better world, really. So it's more facilitating events that are basically in line with the Sustainability Development Goals. And in the last, I think, end of last month, August, we had an event on the social in sustainability, and one of the key topics and what really the theme was talking about, intersectionalism as well, talking about how, what white privilege is and how we can actually own your privilege as a woman. So I think, that's what Women in Sustainability is all about.
Yeah, and is the network open to all women in Scotland, or is it Aberdeen specific?
Well, the hub I lead is in Aberdeen, but due to the COVID-19, all our events are now online. So there are a lot of hubs. So we have a hub in Glasgow, we have one in Edinburgh, we have a few other hubs in different parts of the UK. We have one in Oxford as well. And we've then just expanded to the United States recently and to, I think, this is Sweden. So yeah, it's a growing network, and it's, shooting all over the world. Yeah, so anyone can attend. Just go to the website and just connect with any of the hubs.
Yeah, and we will make sure that we will put links to like all the organizations that the panelists are associated with, or any kind of materials or networks on our social media channels as well. So it's easy for people to find. But yeah, some great suggestions from Zarina and Lola on how to get involved and kind of intersectional approaches to climate change. So moving on to the next question, and this is for both Jane and Ellie, and it's from Mark from North United Communities, who is asking, how can we raise awareness of the need to end patriarchy as part of building a more socially and environmentally just world? So a big question for both of you.
Yeah, I'm happy to take a first stab. So yes, the point raised is that the challenge of climate change and the patriarchy could be interpreted as one and the same, because they're both problems of power. In a patriarchal society and world, climate change simply magnifies and exacerbates the inequalities that are already in existence in our society. So in terms of the steps required to begin to actually address the patriarchy, I would like to highlight three things, in my opinion, are useful. Firstly, we need to change the goals of our society. The current economic model and social structure has, in my opinion, some problematic hierarchy of values, that we place growth over well-being, we place extraction over regeneration, masculinity over femininity, and it's a patriarchal world that has actually undermined the conditions that make Earth habitable in itself. And that's had devastating consequences, from the deforestation in Amazon to disaster capitalism following natural hazards. So we have the evidence and experience to realize that the current trajectory we are on does not lead us to a fair, just, healthy, climate resilient society. But the good thing is that we have alternative futures depending upon the choices we make today. And this is where I feel that if we move away from this focus on growth for growth's sake, to instead narrow away from this examination of GDP, to instead look at sustainable well-being and a well-being economy, which I'm sure Jane can add more to, is really advantageous for this. Secondly, I think we need to change the way our systems are structured and function, because in terms of structure, the patriarchal system devalues both nature and women, in addition to people of colour and poorer communities. And if we want to achieve a net zero climate resilient society, we need to question and we need to challenge the current power structures that are limiting that from happening. And as Patricia spoke about at the start, an intersectional feminist approach to climate justice offers us a way to do this by asking questions about power, asking questions about gender, race, age, disability, location, and how those play out to our lived experience of our environment and climate change. And therefore, any climate action policy can go ways to start to address the patriarchy by looking to enhance equality, be that across gender, social, and racial. Likewise, all other policy and planning and decision-making arenas need to be cognizant in addressing climate change, from agriculture to education to planning policy, because we need widespread systemic change that really questions and challenges the way in which our society operates fundamentally. Because if not, we're just continuing to do this incremental, piecemeal response to the climate emergency, which is essentially shuffling the deck chairs in the Titanic when we can already see the iceberg. Thirdly, I believe that we need local, accessible, and transparent democracy and decision-making processes. We need to engender democracy by adding women, enhancing democratic spaces, but we also need to democratize democracy itself by enhancing avenues to political participation, by fostering learning about politics and policy making, spreading the articulation beyond normal democratic spaces. And one way in which this relates to the climate agenda is the Scottish Government's new proposal of a citizens' assembly on climate change. So I hope when that comes to fruition that they do really seriously take on board and consider the role of gender in climate change, both domestically and internationally. So those are my three recommendations to begin to dismantle the patriarchy and changing the goals of our system, changing the way we are structured and functioned, and to enhance democracy and decision-making processes. But I just want to lastly add a reflection that these are three suggestions and aspirations based on my opinion as a lived experience as a white heterosexual woman, and that I acknowledge my privilege and recognize that many, many more voices are needed in this debate.
Yeah, I totally agree with everything you said, Ellie. I think you've covered quite a lot of the things I wanted to touch on as well. So great that we're kind of on the same page with some of this. But I suppose one thing that I wanted to pull out was what you said about how gender equality and climate change are part of the same fight, as are all social justice issues, really. This is the defining decade in terms of climate action for humanity. So we basically need everybody doing everything they can right away, and we need to be looking for the maximum impact solutions. So thinking intersectionally about problems allows us to create more powerful solutions. They just make better solutions that work for more people, that create bigger impacts. I watched a TED Talk recently, which I felt really illustrated this. It was the TED Talk by Dr. Catherine Wilkinson. And one of the quotes in it that she gave I really like, and she said, "We can't draw down our emissions without women and girls rising up." And she actually equates gender equality with climate solutions like wind farms or forests, which I think people don't necessarily put gender equality at the top of their list of climate solutions, whereas they might put those other solutions up there. And one example she talks about in that TED Talk is women in farming. Women are the world's primary farmers. They're responsible for producing 60 to 80% of food in lower income countries. Compared with men, they have less access to land rights, credit, training, technologies. They're not less capable than men when it comes to farming, but at the moment they produce less on the same amount of land than men do. So when we start to close those gaps for gender inequality and address some of those issues, what we see is that yields of food actually start to increase by 20 to 30%. So in this case, tackling inequality is obviously good for women, and it also helps by boosting food security and reducing the need for deforestation. So the impacts of tackling gender inequality can be really, really powerful. It's estimated that tackling gender inequality in agriculture alone could equate to saving 2 billion tons of CO2 in 30 years. So I think it's about helping people to understand that these intersectional solutions are good for everyone. And we need to be thinking about this, and we need to be unlocking that mindset when we're making decisions. And we need to have different voices represented within that to allow the best decisions to be made to tackle the problem that we're facing. And we don't have a lot of time to do that. So we're going to have to be very quick about unlocking that mindset.
Amazing. Some brilliant suggestions on how to dismantle patriarchy to benefit all of us from Ellie and Jane. So the next question we have is for Lola, and the question is from Ellen at Cambridge Consultants, and she asks, how to best promote change when CEOs are ambivalent towards need to incorporate climate action into work life?
Thank you. That's a good question. Thanks, Helen. I feel that C-suites and CEOs need to be motivated, really. And the way experts, the climate experts, environmentalists have sort of told the story of climate change, to me, could be seen as doom and gloom. And I feel that we can actually tell the story in a different way. And that sort of way would encourage people to take action. You know, we're capable of doing what will enable us to build a better world. We can manage climate risks. We can avoid unavoidable climate change and build an economic model of inclusive growth and shared prosperity. And for us to do that, we need to communicate that to decision makers in the right way, in a way that appeals to them. For example, I had a previous boss in a past life who was more interested in the economics of getting the solution. So what I did was I sort of communicated the gains in an economic way to him, and that was what sold it for him. So it's been able to communicate that to the leaders. You know, we're all leaders. Some people are passionate about ecology, some people about the environment, some people about the polar bear, some people the Bible, some people, you know, it could be stewardship of the land. It could be the faith. It could be the fact that, you know, you're passionate about women's rights. You're passionate about equality. So as we've all said before, you know, it's all interlinked, and being able to find what the person is passionate about, and that way, that could be the way to actually incorporate climate change into work life for that person or for that group of people. And as you know, a lot of companies are very motivated by reputation as well. So if you can show the results of, you know, other competitors, what they're doing and how they're achieving that, that can also help with you actually telling the story. So I think that's what's going to really work for, trying to, influence the C-suites and the CEOs. And not just thinking about it as a Chinese hoax, like some people think about it. It's real. It's the science is on our side. We have the evidence to show that climate change is here and it's here to stay. And we have to do take drastic actions to make changes.
That's such a brilliant answer. And again, it speaks to the power of telling stories and telling stories right, and also knowing your audience when you're telling those stories for maximized impact. That's a brilliant point. I saw, Emma, that you unmuted yourself. Did you want to add something to it?
Yeah, I was just going to chuck in there as well from a slightly different angle. Obviously, we do think day to day about how each pound we spend, how that's a vote towards a better future. And I think, in terms of our apprenticeship scheme that we run at the Science Centre, and thinking about, where you work and where you bring your expertise, there's always that angle as well. And I think it will become more and more important to young people when they look for somewhere to work, that the CEOs are able to understand these challenges and that they are leading their company in a way that will attract young talent. So I guess there's always that way. If your CEO is not changing, bring your talent somewhere else.
Amazing. Thank you so much. So we now have a question for all the panelists. And so I will ask for really short, kind of one sentence answers for this one, if you can. So it's the question is from Fiona at Ashfield Healthcare, who asks, what's the one thing we could start doing today to limit the impact of climate change on women and girls? So I will maybe just go in order. So if I could get Zarina first, sorry to put you on the spot, but one thing that we can all do to limit the impact of climate change on women and girls today.
If we're looking at globally, I think we have to limit it. There's so many things that we could do to limit climate change. I think looking at land is a huge one, and who has access to land. Who has a right to land, who has a right to resources. And I think if we change that power dynamic, somebody else spoke earlier on about power dynamics. I think if we start changing the power dynamics and even looking at leadership, I think would have a huge impact on changing the effects on women.
Awesome. So I've been just informed that we are running slightly over schedule, but we are still fine. But I will take one more answer to that question. So whoever wants to take this one, I will ask for a volunteer. Or
I'll take it.
Yeah, Jane will take it. Awesome.
Yeah, I was just going to say, vote for women, vote them into positions where they can make decisions that impact them. I think that's really important, and not just voting for them, employing them, putting them to speak at events like this as well. So all of these things help.
Can I just quickly add one point, because I do think it's very, very important to fund and resource climate adaptation sufficiently immediately, because we're already seeing the massive financial implications of not having robust social systems and infrastructure, from the recent breach of the Union Canal affecting our drain lines, flooding of domestic homes, and that's only going to get worse in the future. So by investing the money today, we're safeguarding the well-being of women and girls in the future.
Amazing. And Ellie, would you be able to send us some links to how people can donate to these different initiatives? Yeah, we'll make sure that we put them up online as well. So the next question is for Lola or Zarina. So you can either both answer it or one of you can take it. And it's from Laura at CLD Development Education Scotland. And she asks, what can we do at a local level in Scotland to support women to respond to climate change, as well as highlight the inequalities in decision-making and the labour market?
I can start by just saying that what the government can do is, I think at a local level, we can make grants available. I think that was said earlier, and make funds available to women, because a lot of women need to be empowered economically. And that's, one of the reasons why they might not be able to contribute or respond adequately to climate change. So if, that's available for, I know there are a few organizations out there that actually provide funding to empower women in Scotland. There's one called WFS, they provide up to £5,000 grants for women, and it's just what you just need to apply for it, because their vision is to actually, enable women to participate in the society free of barriers that are already in place. So I'd say making those grants available would be something useful. I don't know if Zarina has any other thing to add to that.
Yeah, for me, I think what we have to do is recognise that women aren't just impacted by climate change, but they're also part and parcel of the solution for climate change, and we're the active negotiators for any kind of cultural change. So I think it's actually recognising that is really important, that we are the change makers, and not to sit back and wait for others to initiate things. And we need to start moving forward and recognising who we are and what we're capable of doing. So I think that's really important. I think events like this actually highlight that, and creating these platforms is really important. Also, I think we also have to recognise intersectionality, and looking at data. There isn't actually enough data around women of colour and how women of colour are actually impacted by climate change here in Scotland, or even in the UK. So that actually puts up even more barriers for inclusion, for change, for influencing political change, when we don't even have enough data. So I think putting the resources into the right places for the right people is still very important.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, both. So I'll move on to the next question. So we'll manage to get through all of these, because all of them are brilliant. And I really want to give everyone an opportunity to speak on these issues. So we have another open question. So I'll maybe take two people to answer this one. So if you're really passionate about this particular question, please jump on this opportunity. It's a great question. So it's from Shelley. And she is asking, how can we include people from lower incomes in environmental activism?
I'm going to be a little bit cheeky here. I'm going to say, why do we think that people on lower income don't engage? For me, because I work with communities right across Scotland, people from very deprived areas, and they do engage on environmental issues. It's just creating the right space for them, giving them the right resources. And these issues are just as important to people that are on low, if not even more important, because they're the most vulnerable. They're the ones on the front line, especially if we have a flood. The flood risk of somebody on a lower income is much, much worse than if you're in an affluent area. You'll have insurance, you'll be able to rehouse yourself, you'll have support there. When if you're on a lower income, you're actually being impacted more. So I feel as if they are engaged, but whether they have a position of power to influence is a different thing, right? And it's do we have the right mechanisms and the right structure for that, is a different question.
Lola, yeah, go for it.
I think this is where I really totally understand what Zarina is saying, and it's sort of very important. And also, I think we need allies, people that can actually advocate for human rights and not expect the vulnerable people to be the ones speaking. So, they need to be more resilient, and that's why there needs to be systems in place to address structural racism, structural discrimination. And this is the time whereby the social and environmental justice needs to be more pronounced. People need to talk about this. We have to communicate to this decision makers, to the government, the society, and communicate it to the boards, because they care about these things.
Yeah, great point as well. Thank you both. So the next question is a question for Jane and Ellie again, and it's from Tracy at Catalyze Change, who would like to know, what do you think are the top 3 things young women should be focusing on to help lead and raise awareness for climate action?
So I'll start this time. I think this first one might surprise people a little bit that I've chosen this one, but I think it is really important and it's often overlooked, and it's self-care, and looking after yourself and your community. So it's remembering, I suppose, what you're fighting for, not just what you're fighting against. Making time for fun and joy can really help you stay resilient when you're trying to lead change, and it's really important. I think when it comes to standing up to oppression, there's so much power and support in communities, and that we do need to do that, looking out for each other. We're hearing a lot of terms in the press now, like eco-grief and eco-anxiety, to describe what we're going through in this tragic loss we feel as we watch environmental degradation happen. But I think we need to help each other through that, but also recognise that lots of communities have been experiencing eco-grief for as long as colonialism has existed, and so we need to recognise that as well. It's not a new thing. Secondly, I would say that we need to remember women have always and will always be involved at the heart and front of social justice movements and leadership. And this is kind of touching on something that you mentioned earlier, Zarina, about knowing our strengths. You know, I suppose we've been powerful at creating change throughout history. We've just not always had our stories told about it. In society, we're very socialized to be empathetic and caregivers, whereas men are socialized to be bold risk takers. And as we talked about earlier with the COVID crisis, studies have pointed that women's ability to be both the traditional male stereotypes of leadership and female have stood us in really good stead for fighting coronavirus. And so I think we need to be really proud about what we can bring and the strengths that we have. That's really important. And lastly, I would say we need to have courage and imagination and not be afraid to use those things. We need to be brave enough to tackle injustice in the world, and we need to imagine a better future as possible in order to create it. So that would be my top 3 suggestions.
Yeah, I would echo all of those things Jane said, and just to add a few more. But firstly, I'd just like to register a reservation about the potential premise of this question, that I don't think the responsibility to address climate change lies solely on the shoulders of individuals and citizens, but should be also for companies, conglomerates and nation states. But I do believe that we need both collective and individual action. So in terms of some of the things that I think young women could do to lead climate action and raise awareness is firstly to learn about climate change and educate themselves and those around them, to access the wealth of information on climate change that is out there and how we can respond both in terms of low carbon and adaptation agendas. So I'd highly recommend accessing Adaptation Scotland's website along with Carbon Brief. And I think there's a role that all of us, including young women, to play in educating ourselves about how climate change is going to affect our sector, our community, and sharing that information with those around us, from our friends, our family, our colleagues. Because like the great climate scientist and communicator Catherine Hayhoe says, the best way we can fight climate change is to talk about it. Secondly, I think we need to ensure that young women are taking on and advocating for decision-making roles and positions of influence, going back to that discussion of power. Because whilst it's fantastic that young women are leading the way in terms of activism and school strikes, when we look at global policy making, that's a different story. You know, and actually a WeDo study showed that at the Paris Climate Agreement negotiations, only 22% of the national delegations were female. Similarly, the most recent IPCC report, less than a fifth were female authors. So we need to be working to overcome this and ensure that diverse women have a seat and a voice at every table. In relation to this, my third point would be that we need to support marginalised groups, and we need to understand or utilise privilege where applicable, because we need to recognise the role of campaigners from marginalised backgrounds who for decades have been laying the groundwork for climate activism, as was alluded to in the previous question, and that all of these individuals should be recognised on par with the likes of Greta Thunberg and Extinction Rebellion, because climate change is a collective problem and any action taken against it should represent the collective. Lastly, I think we need to understand and utilise your privilege where you have privilege, because climate justice can never be fully realised or championed for until we truly consider how different parts of our identity interact in our lived experience of how climate change is felt by ourselves and others. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Ellie, for this, and Jane as well. So we are now moving on to our final question of this section. So for those who are listening live to this session, this is your opportunity to ask some questions. If there is anything that you wanted to ask any of the panelists about, this is your chance to start typing in those questions. But the final question that we have is for Emma, and it's from Betsy, who would like to know how will this agenda feature in the upcoming COP26 in Glasgow, and how can its relevance be highlighted?
Thanks. Yeah, really pleased that someone's asked that question, and just have a chance to talk a little bit about how we can go about that. So just to sort of start with a little bit about where Glasgow Science Centre are coming from here, in that we're obviously very close to the site of COP26 next year. We are in discussions with the UK government around hosting the green zone, but we see the kind of green zone and the COP arriving in Glasgow as that moment in time. But this is actually a much wider, exciting opportunity for not only Glasgow, but for the UK and the world to take this moment. And we really see this as an opportunity to talk about this all the way up to the COP, yes, during the COP, and really importantly, afterwards as well. So really, from our point of view, we want to make sure that we extend an open invitation for everybody to get involved in this. And I think we need to be realistic in that lots of people will not see the arrival of this conference as something for them. The other thing to be really realistic about is that we want to understand where people are coming from and make this programme very, very relevant to them. And, I think in terms of the climate change and what people's initial perspectives around that are, and what people may think of the Science Centre's perspective on that in terms of environmental issues. Yes, we're talking about energy and biodiversity and climate science, but I want to be clear that it's extremely important to us, and that's why we're here today, to reflect these social angles of climate change in this programme. And that's why 5 key themes to our programme, one of which is climate justice, and we're working very closely with the Centre for Climate Justice at Glasgow Caledonian. What I would say is we'd be absolutely delighted if everybody on the call could follow our social media channels and have a look at our programme that we're going to launch in October. And on the 28th of October, we will host a climate justice event with the Centre for Climate Justice and the Royal Society of Edinburgh. And likewise, and I know that there's lots of fantastic people on the call today. It's fantastic to meet the panellists. If there's anyone that has suggestions of how we can make the most and exploit this opportunity and make sure that this, as you say, we're talking about this, we're getting it to the fore. The Science Centre, we are here as somebody who wants to provide that platform that's open, that's honest, and that we make use of not only, as I say, my colleague Alison and their brilliant work within communities, and make sure that we're bringing all of that in, but that we are providing an opportunity for everybody, those who understand that there is a human element to climate change, and those who don't, and make sure that we have all of those opportunities for people to engage with, and that we can explore the impact of disability, of race, of age, of gender on climate change, and we can have those discussions. So I would say, I think Stephen's going to share my details in the chat box. Please reach out to me if you have any ideas of events that we want to do to make the most of this opportunity. And also the flyer that's in the Dropbox pack, you can see my contact details on there. So as I say, just please reach out and make sure that we can absolutely make the most of this.
Yeah, and I think that's like a very important point from Emma as well, that this entire event is about creating connections. So we'll make sure, obviously, that all the people who are attending today, who are tuning in or who will be listening afterwards to the recorded version of it, have contact details or Twitter handles for the panelists. So if you have ideas for collaboration, if you have any additional questions, if you want to follow the work that they do and of professional capacity or personal capacity, like this is your opportunity to connect these dots. And I think that's almost, for just a quick summary from me as a chair, like I think that's been like the theme of this entire event, was making those connections, using those powerful stories, telling those stories with really diverse voices, recognizing your own privilege and times when your voice is not the voice that should be heard, and making sure that stories of people coming from diverse backgrounds with diverse lived experiences and with diverse experience of systems of oppression are given the platform to tell their stories. And that we are telling stories in a really clever way, as Lola pointed out, that changing the way we tell those stories depending on the audiences for maximizing impact. So this is the idea behind this entire panel. It's like how we create that how we build that better future. I think we've heard it so many times over the last 6 months that these are unprecedented times and really challenging times, and everything is going to change. But I think this event like really demonstrated how we can create those positive changes and how we can turn this into really positive transformation rather than focusing only on the negative aspects. And both kind of in global terms, but also as many panelists highlighted, how you can do these things locally in your own communities and schools, in your workplaces. So I'm hoping that this gave like a lot of food for thought for people who are listening to us today. And I have like a kind of a selection of comments and questions from the audience. So Jill pointed out, I think it was in response to Ellie and Jane, that we shouldn't just vote for any woman. We want people who are progressive and value environment, social justice, and equity. Which, yeah, as we know, the fact that a woman is in a position of leadership does not guarantee all of these things. So I think, yeah, a very valid point from Jill. And then Christy says, in response to Emma, that she definitely agrees. And she says, I did a Q&A with a school relating to tech careers. And the first question I got asked was, what are you doing for the environment? So I think, again, like making those connections is very important. And then Mark, in response to Ellie, is saying, a brilliant answer. Thanks, Ellie. And there's a question in there. All this demands we ditch capitalism. Would you agree? So another big question for you, Ellie. And he also says, any chance I could vote for you to be the first minister?
I won't say no to that. I obviously I think that that's the end goal, but I think we also have to be realistic about our transition towards an alternative to capitalism, and that not everyone is going to kind of get on board with such an extreme idea, and how do we work that to enhance a social change that works for everyone, and maybe there's steps in between there. And I suppose I would invite Jane to come, because I know she's got much more experience in terms of the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, and I'm sure could contribute much more articulately than me.
Well, the only thing I would add is that we need to be asking what growth is for and who does it serve. So instead of just saying we need growth for growth's sake, we need to be saying, what social good does this do? How are we better off as a society because we have growth? So it's for me, it's about looking at growth in a different way and using different measures. We know that GDP does not measure women's unpaid labour, and it does not measure the destruction of the natural world. So we need to just be thinking, what kind of measures can we use that actually illustrate what well-being in society actually looks like? So I suppose that's how I see it.
Yeah, and to add to that, I think it's like looking at social value. So looking at what social value is, what social value means, who benefits from social value, and putting people at the heart of everything we do is really important.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you. So we have another. Oh, Lola, you wanted to come in for this one, or?
No, it's okay.
Yeah, no, you can go ahead, please.
Yeah, I was just going to say that we also need to invest in not just changing unjust laws. We need to invest in also changing, cultures as well, because we have a culture of consumerism. Like, we need to buy. You buy a car that should last you 25 years, but the same manufacturer of that car, the sales department will call you every year to ask you to buy a new car. So it's like there's a mix match even within organizations. Mm-hmm. So it's just basically shifting the culture. I think that's a big aspect as well for me.
Fantastic, thank you. So I have a question for all of you from Christy. So do the panel feel that the global pandemic and subsequent national lockdowns have been help or hindrance to the progress towards building a better future? A really big question.
I'll start off, right? I'm always the one that's going to go with the negative, right? Yes. So locally, yes, you've seen communities come together and communities work together. However, I think on a bit more of a national, if you look at more nationally and look at the narratives that are coming out of like, we're in this together, we're not in it together, right? There's marginalized communities that aren't in it. There's the pandemic has shown this inequality of not being in it together. So, and then on top of that, we have this narrative, this diversive narrative, like such things that have been coming out in the media, that is a certain sector in society and it's their fault for the pandemic, you know, and these are coming out of leadership. And for me, that's actually really worrying, because I don't really think the pandemic has brought people together. I think it's actually creating diverse society.
Yeah, does anyone want to respond to that? Lola,
I was going to add to what Zarina said. I totally agree with Zarina. I also think that, you know, COVID-19 has shown that companies in general with a strong sense of purpose, they've managed to shift their business model quickly. You see companies that used to make gin now making the hand sanitizers. So I think focusing on resilience and putting people first is key to this, really.
So it's like a combination of like negative and positive. So we have like the negative of those cracks that were there are expanding even further, and we see those divisions like highlighted even more. But at the same time, we have like resilience and adaptability, and we can see certain sectors like adapting in a really meaningful way. And I think that's kind of greatly summarizes this current crisis. So I have two more questions that I'm hoping we'll manage to get through. So the first one is, are there any good resources online to explain these issues in an easy to understand or digest format? And it's a question from Shelley.
You organise starting out and to get some resources on this, and they're called Intersectional Environmentalists. At the moment they're on Instagram, and I'm not sure if they're on Twitter yet, but they're more sort of on the social media side of things, and they put together very sort of palatable, easy to read short summaries of key issues. They've got a website as well, but I know they're just starting out and they are still building their website, and they're still putting together a lot of information. So that's quite a good one to look at, and it does cover lots of different areas of social justice and how it links to environment.
And could you just repeat what Instagram handle it is? Because
I think it's just Intersectional Environmentalist, but I can send it through in the chat and we can get that out to people.
Awesome. We just lost you for like the first 5 seconds of your answer.
Oh, sorry. So it should be under Intersectional Environmentalists.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
The Women's Environmental Network have a wonderful website, and have a look at that. And also WEDO, so that's a Women's Environmental and Development Organisation, and both are great resources if you're interested in feminism and environment.
Fantastic, thank you so much. So we have a question from Beth, who says, I would love it if the panel could share anything they do in their everyday practices that work towards this better future. For example, conversations you have, what do you read, how you eat, etc. Lola, yeah?
Yeah, so I think the framework I work with is basically acting, enabling, and influencing. When I say acting, I mean trying to look for ways that I can sort of lower my carbon emissions. Like sometimes I walk to work, I don't have to drive. Just little things you can do. And when people see you do these things, they can actually, copy you. You're trying to sort of influencing people as well. Being an advocate, taking a stand. I also believe that it's not just, raising banners and being an activist without doing something like providing solutions. I mean, I think activism is quite popular now. People are going out, it is really fantastic. Young people are more engaged, but I feel that we also need to provide solutions as well, and maybe propose solutions to the people that we're actually speaking to and trying to raise awareness to. So yeah, I do things like that. I'm starting to eat less meat now. I'm not yet vegan, but we'll see how that goes. So those are things I'm doing.
Thank you.
I would say for me, I mean, I chose my career based on this. So I'm lucky enough that I've managed to get into a career that allows me to work on what I care about every day. On top of that, I do try and do a lot of things in my personal life, like dietary choices, so plant-based meals and things like that, cutting down on what I buy. So I try to sort of move away from that consumerist culture that we were talking about earlier. I remember when I first started doing that, there was almost this kind of, I suppose, stigma around buying like second-hand clothes, that people would say, oh, you bought that second-hand, whereas now I'm trying to tell that positive story that no, that's actually a really good thing. So I just try to make small changes in my personal life as well, and just try to practice what I preach, along with doing my job, which I love doing as well. So I'm quite lucky in that sense.
Amazing, thank you. Now I should point out that I just found out today that September is a second-hand month. So if you follow that hashtag on Instagram or on Twitter, you would find a lot of advice on how to buy second-hand. So it definitely has grown into a big movement, which is great to see. Is there anything that Emma, Zarina, or Ellie you would like to add?
Yeah, similar to Jane and Lola. So in my own personal life, yes, I do small things, just very similar to them. But I also, and I'm fortunate because, and I'm able to do this through my work, is create platforms for others, and open doors for others. And like I always use an analogy of like a party. So I'm the gate crasher going knocking on the door, and then opening the door for other people to come and crash the party. So that's my work within diversity and inclusion.
Amazing, thank you. Ellie?
I suppose my thing that I do would be about kind of echoing the importance of narratives and storytelling, is relating the climate change agenda and in my work, the importance of climate adaptation to my friends and colleagues' personal interests and work sectors, because I think lots of people see it as an other, it'll affect that place or that business, and really bringing that message home, but in a positive way, because I think the hesitation is that people can feel guilt tripped and really turn off. So it's making sure that you provide that positive vision, whilst also being honest about the severity of the climate impacts we face if we do not start making positive choices now.
Brilliant. Emma, last chance if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I would say somebody, the most useful thing I could probably say is somebody I find really inspirational is Less Waste Laura, who's on Instagram. And if you're looking for someone who day to day can tell you really practical things that can make you feel like you're changing something and give you a little win, I would totally recommend following her. She'll tell you anything better than I ever will, but I would definitely recommend following her.
Thank you. That's a great suggestion. As I said, we'll kind of put it as on our social media as well, so it's easier for people to find. But yeah, we're bang on time. So it's my pleasure now to say thank you first and foremost to all the amazing panelists who joined us today. The breadth of experience, both kind of professional and lived experience in this digital room has been amazing. And I feel like I've personally learned so much in that last hour. And I hope that kind of echoes for people who listen to this panel today. And yeah, continue being engaged with the work that Glasgow Science Centre does and that Young Women Movement does. Follow us on social media. We'll be hopefully coming up with new exciting events for all of you as well. But yeah, so normally if it was a kind of face-to-face event, I would ask for a round of applause. So I'll just do my own for all of you. And thank you so much for joining us today. And also thank you to Glasgow Science Centre team. Thank you to Alison and Stephen and Craig, who have been working kind of behind the stage. And thank you also to Elena from the Young Women's Movement, who's been supporting this event. And yeah, thank you for being with us here today. And yeah, check out our social media for more information about this event, and follow all the panelists and follow all the amazing work that they are doing. And hopefully we can realize that vision of building better future together. So thank you again for being here with us today.